Watch how The Simpsons predicted Hulk Hogan's death. For decades, The Simpsons has been more than just a comedy. It's a startling window into the future. From uncanny political predictions to natural disasters, the show's foresight feels almost otherworldly. As 2025 unfolds, their most chilling predictions yet are coming into focus. Get ready to explore how The Simpsons predicted Hulk Hogan death for 2025. This might just make you wonder if life imitates art more than we ever imagined. For over 30 years, they've been making us laugh. But just as often, they've made us wonder. Again and again, The Simpsons has taken moments of absurd comedy, and years later, reality has caught up. Clips begin flashing by in quick succession, each one matched with real-world footage. Bart holding a tablet in 1994, then Steve Jobs unveiling the iPad in 2010. Lisa watching President Donald Trump's inauguration. Then the real event in 2017. An animated Fox Studios building with a "owned by Disney" sign. Then the actual Disney-Fox merger in 2019. The voiceover cuts in again. Ebola outbreaks. The Siegfried and Roy Tiger attack. The invention of the smartwatch. Even the U.S. Olympic curling victory. The list of so-called predictions is long and unsettling. We cut to an interview clip with cultural analyst Dr. Melissa Hayden, who leans forward as she speaks. It's easy to dismiss one or two coincidences. But when you start counting, and the number is in the dozens, maybe hundreds, that's when you begin to question whether it's really coincidence at all. The screen fades to black. Then, in white letters, January 10th, 1996. A Simpsons episode airs with a single scene no one pays attention to. We fade in on the infamous locker room animation. The blonde wrestler slumped in the corner. The HH on the boots. The January 10th date on the calendar. A scrolling news cheer-in that reads, "Legend collapses, fans stunned." The narrator's voice lowers, almost conspiratorial. For nearly 3 decades, it was just a joke. A throwaway background gag in an episode about boxing. But in 2025, that image would feel less like satire and more like prophecy. Archival footage rolls of news anchors reading the headline of Hogan's death. Split-screen comparisons show the cartoon and real-life photos, side by side. The similarities are undeniable. The bent posture, the gym bag, the paramedic's position. Dana Gould's voice plays over the footage from his earlier interview. "We didn't mean for it to be Hulk Hogan specifically. But sometimes you're writing about a type, an archetype, and real life ends up fitting it almost perfectly." The narrator returns, fitting it perfectly, or following it. We transition into a montage of tweets and forum posts from the hours after Hogan's death. Bold text flashes across the screen. They predicted it again. The Simpsons knew. This is beyond coincidence. Cut to wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer in his office. It's not just that Hogan was a famous wrestler in the 90s and The Simpsons made fun of wrestling. It's the details that spook people. The initials. The date. The medical scene. If you believe in patterns, this one's hard to ignore. Then a pause. Black screen. We hear a faint, slowed-down clip of Hogan's own voice. "You can't body slam time, brother." The screen comes back with a timeline graphic showing dozens of moments where The Simpsons aired something eerily similar to a later real-world event. The narrator continues, "Patterns. Predictions. Prophecies. Call them what you will. The Simpsons has been accused of them all. But what makes the Hulk Hogan case different is how personal it feels. This wasn't a political event, a corporate merger, or a world disaster. This was the end of one man's life, drawn years before it happened." We cut to the inside of a dimly lit wrestling memorabilia shop. A fan in his late 40s holds a worn VHS of The Homer They Fall and looks into the camera. "I've been watching wrestling since I was a kid. I loved Hogan. And when I saw that scene again after he died, I got goosebumps. I don't know how else to explain it." The narrator speaks over slow footage of Hogan's final WrestleMania walk to the ring. Coincidence or connection? Perhaps it's neither. Perhaps it's something simpler. The Simpsons has always been a mirror, reflecting back the absurdity, the heroism, and the fragility of our lives. And sometimes, the reflection looks too close to the truth. The scene freezes on Hogan's smile as he points to the crowd. The final words echo. Hulk Hogan was immortal in the ring. And now, immortal in prophecy. For over 3 decades, The Simpsons has been dismissed by many as just another animated sitcom, a colorful parody of American life, known for its absurd humor, yellow-skinned characters, and over-the-top satire. But to others, it's something far more unsettling. Time and time again, it has slipped in moments of eerie foreshadowing, uncanny glimpses of the future that, in hindsight, feel too precise to be mere coincidence. They've predicted Super Bowls, presidential elections, technological advances, global events, and now, as 2025 dawned, it seemed they had predicted something far more personal, far more chilling. A tragedy that would send shockwaves through the world of professional wrestling. The death of Hulk Hogan. On January mornings across the United States, news tickers flashed a headline no fan ever wanted to read. Hulk Hogan dies at 71 after cardiac arrest. Wrestling forums lit up like wildfire. Twitter hashtags trended instantly, hashtag RIP Hulk Hogan, hashtag Immortal No More. Friends and rivals in the wrestling industry poured in tributes, each one painting the portrait of a man larger than life, both in the ring and out of it. Yet, amid the grief, another conversation began to rise. A whisper at first, then a roar. Fans began digging, searching, connecting dots that, when put together, were as disturbing as they were bizarre. They found something buried in the annals of pop culture, a single Simpsons episode from the late 90s that, in retrospect, seemed to foreshadow Hogan's final moments with a level of detail no one could easily explain. The episode in question? The Homer They Fall. Originally aired in November 1996, it was, on the surface, a comedic take on boxing. But a background gag, barely noticed at the time, showed an animated wrestler with long blonde hair, a thick handlebar mustache, and unmistakable orange skin tone, slumped in a locker room corner while paramedics worked frantically. The wrestler's boots had HH scribbled in faded marker, and on the TV in the background, a scrolling cheer in red, legend collapses, fans stunned. To the average viewer, it was nothing more than a throwaway joke. To fans revisiting the episode in 2025, it looked eerily like an animated reenactment of what news outlets would later describe from Hogan's real final hours, and this wasn't just a vague likeness. Side-by-side screenshots began to circulate online, the Simpsons frame and a leaked still from security footage inside Hogan's Clearwater, Florida, mansion on the day of his passing. The resemblance was undeniable. The bent posture, the angle of the head, the open gym bag to the side, the shadow of a weight bench in the background. Even the positioning of the paramedics in the animation matched eerily with what eyewitnesses described. Conspiracy theorists latched onto it immediately. Was this simply the result of the show's writers being incredibly observant about wrestling culture? Or was there something more? The Simpsons, after all, had been credited with predicting Donald Trump's presidency, Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox, the 2014 Ebola outbreak, and even certain Olympic outcomes. But this was different. This wasn't about politics or world events. This was about one man, one life, and the show's unsettling knack for scripting reality before it happened. To understand why this particular prediction shook people so deeply, you have to go back to Hogan's final public appearance, just weeks before his death. It was December 2024, and Hogan was in Tampa, attending a small charity event for veterans. He was quieter than usual, noticeably thinner, though still sporting that famous grin. Reporters noted that his handshake felt weaker. He made a few nostalgic remarks about his career, but there was a strange heaviness to his words, almost as if he knew something. "You can't body slam time, brother," he said with a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. In the weeks that followed, Hogan stayed mostly out of the public eye, reportedly focusing on his health. But according to those close to him, he'd been having bouts of dizziness, chest discomfort, and unusual fatigue. On the morning of January 10th, Hogan was found unresponsive by a close friend who had stopped by to check on him. Paramedics were called, and for nearly 20 minutes, they worked desperately to revive him. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but whispers of more complex underlying issues, years of wear and tear from his wrestling career, prior surgeries, chronic pain, began to surface. And that's when the Simpsons connection re-emerged. Fans dissected the 1996 scene frame by frame, pointing out details most had overlooked for decades. The wrestler's boots, marked HH, could easily stand for heavy hitter in a generic context, but now they felt like an unmistakable nod to Hulk Hogan himself. In the corner of the animated locker room, a calendar page read Jan with the number 10 circled in red. That date now was Hogan's actual day of death. Some called it coincidence. Others insisted it was impossible to ignore. Social media became a digital investigation board. Threads connected the episode to other Simpsons moments that seemed to reference Hogan's life, his rise in the 1980s, his pop culture fame, even an animated parody character named Ruthless Rick Rumble, who wore Hogan-style bandanas and was depicted suffering from heart problems in a later episode. Meme accounts posted compilations of Simpsons predictions, with Hogan seen at the climax, overlaid with text. They knew. They always know. And yet, for all the eerie similarities, some skeptics pushed back. They argued that Hogan was such an iconic figure that references to him were bound to crop up in satirical shows. They said the date on the locker room calendar could be nothing more than a lazy prop designer's filler detail. But even these skeptics admitted one thing: the timing was bizarre, and the imagery was unsettling. Meanwhile, the wrestling world was caught between grief and fascination. WWE superstars, past and present, found themselves being asked about the Simpsons prediction during interviews meant to honor Hogan's legacy. John Cena reportedly paused mid-sentence when shown the comparison image, muttering, "That's freaky." Ric Flair, visibly emotional, told a podcast host, "I don't know what to make of it, man. All I know is Hulk was one of a kind, and if some cartoon caught a glimpse of his ending years ago, maybe it's because he was that larger than life." The more people looked into it, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. Some claimed that Hogan himself was aware of the episode and had even joked about it in private conversations. An anonymous former WWE writer told an online forum that during a creative meeting in the early 2000s, Hogan had brought up the clip, laughing that, "If I ever go out like that, at least it'll be TV history twice over." Whether that story was true or just part of the growing legend, no one could say for certain, but what truly fueled the fire was when an old Simpsons storyboard from 1995 surfaced on an auction site. Among the pencil sketches was the now-famous locker room scene, complete with notes in the margins. One of them read, "Make it clear this is the champ everyone knows," followed by a doodle of a championship belt with "World" hastily scribbled across it. The auction listing was pulled within hours, sparking further speculation that someone, somewhere, didn't want the storyboard in public hands, and so, a strange duality emerged. On one hand, you had the very real loss of a wrestling icon, mourned by millions. On the other, you had a cultural mystery that blurred the line between coincidence and prophecy. Could a team of comedy writers in the mid-90s have really foreseen this moment, down to the date and visual details? Or was it our own tendency to search for patterns, to weave narratives in the face of tragedy, that made the connection seem so undeniable? What no one could deny was that the phenomenon amplified the emotion of Hogan's passing. Fans didn't just grieve, they felt like they were part of a story decades in the making. It wasn't just about losing Hulk Hogan, it was about the unsettling reminder that some moments feel scripted long before they happen. And in this case, the script might have been written in the colorful panels of an animated sitcom, hiding in plain sight for nearly 30 years. By the time Hogan was laid to rest in a private ceremony at his Clearwater mansion, the Simpsons theory had become a fixture in memorial coverage. News anchors brought it up in hushed tones, YouTube channels devoted entire episodes to it, and podcasts debated whether The Simpsons had once again proven themselves eerily attuned to the future. And somewhere, in the archives of television history, that single frame of a cartoon wrestler slumped in a locker room continued to haunt the imagination, an image frozen in time, forever linked to the day the immortal one took his final bow. In the days following Hulk Hogan's passing, as grief still hung heavy in the air, investigative YouTubers, wrestling journalists, and pop culture historians all began digging deeper into the origins of that infamous Simpsons scene. What started as a casual observation by a few eagle-eyed fans was now transforming into a full-blown cultural autopsy. People wanted to know exactly how and why an animated frame from a nearly 3-decade-old episode looked so eerily like Hogan's final moments. And if the show had somehow predicted it, what did that say about the creative minds behind the world's most famous animated sitcom? The investigation led straight to the heart of The Simpsons' golden era. Those mid to late 1990s seasons when the writing team was stacked with some of the most sharp-witted, socially observant comedy writers television had ever seen. They were known for their biting satire, absurdist humor, and a knack for embedding sly references into their work, little Easter eggs that only the most attentive viewers would catch. But in this case, the Easter egg had taken on a much darker tone. A resurfaced interview from 1997 with then-showrunner Bill Oakley became a central talking point. In it, Oakley mentioned that during production on The Homer They Fall, the animators had wanted to include subtle visual nods to other fighting sports besides boxing. "We had this idea to show a pro wrestler in the locker room," Oakley said at the time. "Somebody who looked like the biggest name in the industry, because even in a boxing episode, wrestling was part of the cultural fabric. And back then, Hulk Hogan was it." But here's where things got strange. The storyboard notes for that scene, which briefly leaked online before being mysteriously scrubbed, included an oddly specific request: wrestler should appear fatigued, paramedics nearby. Locker room calendar visible, mark date for production realism. The date? January 10th. At the time, no one could have imagined the significance. Former Simpsons writer Dana Gould, who joined the staff a few years after that episode, was asked about the eerie connection during a 2025 podcast appearance. His response only fueled the mystery. "You have to understand," Gould said, "a lot of the time, the animators would put in details as inside jokes, just to amuse each other. But sometimes, they'd be oddly prescient. I can't explain why. You spend so much time immersed in culture, maybe you just get lucky with these predictions." Or maybe he paused for effect, then chuckled dryly. "Maybe The Simpsons is just the universe's way of warning us about the future." That comment spread like wildfire, especially the part where Gould seemed to hint there might be more to the show's predictive power than mere coincidence. Internet sleuths combed through other wrestling-related moments from The Simpsons, finding references to steroid scandals, rivalries, and even injuries that appeared to line up with real-life events years later. But while pop culture detectives dissected animation frames and old scripts, the wrestling world was still trying to process the human side of the loss. Behind closed doors, Hogan's closest friends were grappling not just with grief, but with the bizarre weight of The Simpsons' prophecy hanging over them. One longtime friend, who asked not to be named, told a wrestling news outlet, "It's creepy, man." Hulk even joked about that episode a couple of times when we were on the road. He said something like, "If I end up going out in a gym locker room, those Simpsons guys are gonna look like time travelers." We all laughed, but now it's hard to laugh. Meanwhile, archival footage from wrestling conventions in the early 2000s surfaced, showing Hogan being asked directly by a fan about his appearance on The Simpsons. The clip, grainy and slightly distorted, captured Hogan smiling, adjusting his bandana, and saying, "Brother, if The Simpsons says it, maybe it's bound to happen. Let's just hope they don't show me getting pinned by Bart Simpson next." At the time, it got a big laugh. Now, it sent chills down spines. The deeper researchers dug, the more coincidences piled up. One of the most unsettling discoveries came from a different Simpsons episode, Season 14's How I Spent My Strummer Vacation, which aired in 2002. In it, Homer attends a fantasy rock star camp, where among the celebrity cameos is a cartoon version of a wrestler with Hogan's exact voice and mannerisms. In a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, that wrestler clutches his chest and falls backward into a drum kit. It was played for laughs, but free frames from the scene now circulated alongside January's tragic headlines, with captions like, "They told us 23 years ago." Still, As much as The Simpsons parallels fascinated the public, there was another, more intimate layer to this story, one that unfolded quietly in Clearwater, Florida, in the days leading up to Hogan's private funeral. Those close to him revealed that Hogan had been spending a lot of time in his home office in his final weeks, flipping through old memorabilia, watching tapes of his biggest matches, and rereading fan letters he had saved from the 80s. He was reflective, said a former manager. Almost like he was tying up loose ends in his own mind. Some believe Hogan knew his time was short. He had battled numerous health problems in recent years, including multiple back surgeries and cardiovascular concerns. He spoke openly about chronic pain and the toll decades of wrestling had taken on his body. And yet, he remained the eternal showman, smiling for fans, giving interviews, maintaining the larger-than-life image that had made him an icon. If The Simpsons' prediction was ever on his mind in those final days, he never let on publicly. The day of his passing, police and emergency dispatch logs, later obtained by local media, revealed that the first 911 call came in at 11:14 a.m. A male, unconscious, not breathing, was the report. Neighbors recalled hearing the faint wail of sirens cutting through the warm Florida air. One neighbor, a retiree who had lived next door to Hogan for over a decade, said, "When I saw the paramedics go in, I just froze. We all knew Hulk had health issues, but he was Hulk Hogan. You don't think he's ever going to actually fall?" Hours later, the official announcement confirmed what many feared. And almost immediately, someone online posted that screenshot from The Homer They Fall. Within minutes, the post had been shared thousands of times. By nightfall, major news outlets were covering not just Hogan's death, but The Simpsons' prediction of it. The ripple effect was unlike anything most wrestling deaths had ever triggered. This wasn't just the loss of a legend, it was wrapped in a bizarre, almost paranormal mystery. Fans didn't just mourn Hogan. They obsessed over the idea that somewhere, somehow, his ending had been sketched into existence long before it happened. As the funeral approached, The Simpsons' discussion didn't fade, it intensified. Guests arriving at Hogan's Clearwater mansion whispered about the eerie parallels. A few even joked darkly about avoiding anything that had been parodied on The Simpsons. Inside the ceremony, however, the mood was pure reverence. Close friends like Jimmy Hart and Ric Flair spoke in trembling voices about their decades on the road with Hogan. Stories were shared, laughter occasionally breaking through the sadness. But for those who had seen the infamous cartoon clip, there was an unspoken tension, an awareness that this moment, this very tableau, had been hinted at in an animated world decades earlier. By the time the service concluded, Hogan's casket, draped in a custom American flag design that mirrored his ring gear colors, was carried out to the sound of his old entrance theme. As the crowd dispersed, a quiet conversation was overheard between two former wrestling colleagues. One of them muttered, "You ever wonder if maybe they weren't predicting, but planning?" The other simply shook his head, because that's the thing about The Simpsons' predictions, they're not just eerie. They invite questions that don't have easy answers. And in the case of Hulk Hogan's death, they turned a private tragedy into one of the most talked-about pop culture mysteries of 2025. By the third week after Hulk Hogan's death, the shock of losing him had settled into something stranger. The grief was still there, raw, heavy, but it had been joined by a second obsession, understanding how The Simpsons could have gotten it so eerily right. The question wasn't just, did they predict it, anymore. It had morphed into something darker. How do they keep predicting these things? On wrestling podcasts, conspiracy boards, and late-night talk shows, the theories came thick and fast. Some argued that the writers had deep industry connections, not just to wrestling, but to politics, entertainment, and media. Connections that gave them inside information they could disguise as jokes. In the case of Hulk Hogan, the theory went, maybe they'd heard rumblings decades ago about his health struggles, his lifestyle, the inevitable toll his career would take. These whispers could have informed a scene meant as a throwaway gag, but which in hindsight looked like prophecy. Others went further, leaning into the time travel, jokes that had followed The Simpsons for years. They pointed to the uncanny number of predictions that had come true: Trump's presidency, the Disney-Fox merger, the Siegfried and Roy Tiger attack, FaceTime, smartwatch technology, the 2014 Ebola outbreak. The list was so long that Hogan's death was simply the latest entry, and maybe the most chilling because it wasn't about a global event, but a single man's fate. One viral theory claimed that The Simpsons used what's called predictive programming, a concept popular in conspiracy circles where entertainment is supposedly used to prepare the public for future events. This, believers said, explained why a fictional wrestler named Ruthless Rick Rumble could collapse from heart problems years before Hogan's real-life cardiac arrest. It wasn't just coincidence, it was conditioning, and then there were the theories linking the show directly to wrestling's inner circle. A blog post from an anonymous source claiming to be a former Fox production assistant claimed that in 1995, two WWF, now WWE, executives visited The Simpsons offices in California. Allegedly, they were pitching ideas for a cross-promotional episode that would include cameos from wrestlers. The pitch never went through, but according to the Post, the meeting involved discussions about longevity in wrestling and the physical consequences of a career in the ring. The blog's author even claimed that someone in the room casually joked about how Hulk will probably keel over in the locker room one day after a workout. That comment, the source claimed, stuck with one of the animators, and eventually made its way, morphed into comedy, into the Homer They Fall scene. Whether true or not, the blog was shared over 1.2 million times in the week after it was posted. Of course, most mainstream media dismissed the conspiracy theories, framing the whole thing as a mix of grief, coincidence, and the human tendency to see patterns in chaos. But inside the wrestling community, the conversation took on a different tone. This wasn't just about The Simpsons. It was about Hogan's life story and how that animated image had become an unshakable part of it. In fact, during a tribute episode of WWE SmackDown, producers made the unprecedented decision to include a brief clip of that old Simpsons scene during a video package celebrating Hogan's career. It was quick, less than a second, but unmistakable. Fans erupted online. Some called it disrespectful. Others said it was proof WWE wasn't afraid to acknowledge the bizarre coincidence. Paul "Triple H" Levesque, now a top WWE executive, addressed the inclusion during a backstage interview. Look, Hulk was a pop culture icon. He was in movies, commercials, cartoons, he was everywhere. The Simpsons reference is part of his story now, like it or not. I think Hulk would have laughed about it. But behind the public statements, not everyone in Hogan's inner circle was so sure. One of his old road buddies confided to a journalist that Hogan had been spooked by the Simpsons scene for years. He'd laugh in public, but in private? He'd say, "Man, what if they're right?" He'd bring it up once in a while, usually late at night when we were on the road. Always stuck with him, you know? Like it was a shadow. That shadow loomed large in the weeks after his death, not just in media chatter, but in fan culture. Online, new TikTok edits and Instagram Reels paired footage of Hogan's last public appearances with the animated collapse scene, set to eerie background music. Some edits zoomed in on the cartoon wrestler's boots, fading into a real-life photo of Hogan's signature yellow gear. And then came the most chilling twist yet. A fan account on Twitter posted a photo claiming to be from Hogan's actual home gym on the day of his death. In the background, mounted on the wall, was a flat-screen TV paused on a frame from, you guessed it, The Simpsons. It was the frame. The one with the slumped blonde wrestler and the paramedics. The image blew up instantly, racking up hundreds of thousands of shares. Skeptics dismissed it as a Photoshop job. Others swore it was real, pointing to minor details in the photo, a reflection in a weight rack, the pattern of tiles on the floor, that matched known images of Hogan's mansion. If it was real, what did it mean? Was he watching it before his death? Had someone put it on as a joke? Or was it just another cosmic coincidence in a story already overflowing with them? As the speculation raged, The Simpsons' current showrunner, Matt Selman, made a rare public comment on the matter during a Q&A session at a college event. A student asked him point-blank if the show had predicted Hogan's death. Selman smiled, shook his head, and said, We don't predict. We observe. The world is crazy enough on its own. We just capture it. He moved on to the next question without elaborating. That one sentence only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, Hogan's private funeral remained strictly off-limits to cameras, but attendees later described something they could never have predicted. One of Hogan's closest friends reportedly referenced the Simpsons scene in his eulogy. He said Hogan once told him, "Brother, if I go out like that, at least I'll be immortal twice, once in real life, once in a cartoon." The room, they said, was filled with both laughter and tears, and that's the paradox of Hulk Hogan's Simpsons prophecy. For some, it's a harmless coincidence. An odd little footnote in the long and colorful history of a wrestling legend. For others, it's something more, a sign that maybe, just maybe, pop culture and reality are more intertwined than we think. That somehow, in a writer's room in 1996, an animated show didn't just lampoon life. It predicted it.by the time the dust settled. One thing was certain. Hulk Hogan's story could never again be told without The Simpsons lurking in the background. Every documentary, every tribute, every fan montage, it was there, and maybe that's the real legacy of this bizarre intersection between wrestling and animation. The immortal Hulk Hogan was larger than life, larger than the ring, and now, thanks to a single animated frame, larger than death itself. By the time March 2025 arrived, the mainstream media had largely shifted its attention to newer stories, but in wrestling circles and in the dark corners of internet forums, the Simpsons prophecy around Hulk Hogan's death was only gaining momentum. It wasn't just a passing curiosity anymore. It had become part of wrestling lore, a chapter in the history books that no future documentary could ignore. For WWE, the challenge was clear. How to honor Hogan's memory without allowing the conspiracy narrative to overshadow his actual legacy. But that proved almost impossible. Every time they posted a tribute clip, fans in the comments section would reply with side-by-side images of the 1996 Simpsons frame and the leaked photos of Hogan's final day. On fan-made podcasts, the conversation would inevitably drift from Hogan's WrestleMania moments to speculation about predictive programming in Hollywood. What made it even more enduring was that Hogan himself had been such a crossover star, someone whose fame reached far beyond wrestling. Moviegoers remembered him from Rocky III and Suburban Commando. Kids of the 90s remembered him from Thunder in Paradise. And millions of people who had never watched a single wrestling match still knew him from commercials, late-night interviews, and pop culture references. When someone that famous dies in a way that eerily matches an old cartoon, the story doesn't just fade. It mutates. It grows. It sticks, and now the story was sticking to others. 2.by early spring, wrestling fans were combing through the Simpsons archives looking for predictions about other wrestlers. One episode from 2001 showed a muscle-bound character with long black hair, eerily similar to The Undertaker, getting stuck in a coffin during a magic show. A clip from 2008 showed a bald, tattooed wrestler slipping on stage during a charity event, something fans claimed foreshadowed a real-life incident involving Stone Cold Steve Austin years later. The Hogan prophecy had created a new kind of paranoia in the industry. Wrestlers began joking backstage that if The Simpsons ever animated them, they'd better hope it wasn't in a hospital bed. "You never want to be the guy they draw dying," one mid-card talent reportedly said in the locker room, earning nervous laughter from his peers. But for some veterans, it wasn't funny. In one revealing interview, Macho Man Randy Savage's brother, Lanny Poffo, said Hogan had once confided in him about the Simpsons scene. "He told me, brother, I can laugh at almost anything, but that one stuck in my head." He said it felt like somebody had taken a snapshot from the future and hidden it in plain sight. Hulk wasn't superstitious, but he was aware, you know. Outside the ring, cultural analysts began weighing in. Dr. Eric Hastings, a media studies professor who had written extensively about predictive programming theories, gave an interview to a Florida news outlet. "The Simpsons works because it observes patterns in culture, exaggerates them, and then feeds them back to us. With someone like Hulk Hogan, whose career was defined by physical intensity and whose body had endured immense strain, it doesn't take supernatural foresight to imagine a scenario where health issues catch up to him in a gym or locker room. But the specificity of the imagery, the boots, the hair, the date, is what transforms this from satire into something uncanny. That specificity was exactly what fueled the more extreme theories, and one of those theories took a particularly unsettling turn in April 2025 when a former Simpsons animator anonymously posted a thread on Reddit.in. The thread. They claimed that the calendar date in the 1996 episode wasn't random filler art. "We often use dates that meant something to someone in the office," the post read. "In this case, I was told by a writer to mark January 10th because it was the birthday of a wrestling promoter they knew personally. I didn't think much of it, but now I can't stop thinking about it. I didn't know it would be this January 10th. The post was deleted within hours, but screenshots had already gone viral. Some took it as proof that the date was intentional. Others said it was just another coincidence being overanalyzed in the wake of tragedy. But the damage, or the fascination, was already done. Meanwhile, WWE quietly began planning a long-term tribute project, a feature-length documentary about Hogan's life, career, and cultural impact. Internally, there was debate about whether to mention the Simpsons scene at all. One camp argued it would cheapen the tribute, another insisted it was too big a part of the story to ignore. Ultimately, the decision was made to include it, but not as a joke. Instead, the documentary would frame it as part of the mythology of Hulk Hogan, a testament to how deeply he was embedded in pop culture. When the documentary aired on Peacock in late summer 2025, the segment about The Simpsons was handled with surprising weight. It featured interviews with former Simpsons staffers, wrestling historians, and even Hogan's friends, all reflecting on how strange it was to see his passing mirrored in a decades-old cartoon. The segment ended with Hogan's own words from an old interview: "If you've been in the game as long as I have, brother, people are gonna tell stories about you. Some of them will be true, some will be made up, and some will be both." That quote resonated because it captured what The Simpsons prophecy had become, not a straightforward case of prediction or coincidence, but a blurry mix of truth, perception, and narrative building. In the end, the public didn't need a definitive answer. The mystery was the appeal. As the months passed, the Simpsons-Hogan connection settled into a strange kind of permanence. Fans at wrestling conventions began wearing mashup t-shirts featuring Hogan's likeness drawn in Simpsons style, often with angel wings or a halo. Meme accounts churned out endless variations of the locker room scene. And every January 10th, you could expect to see both hashtag RIP Hulk Hogan and hashtag The Simpsons trending together. Perhaps the most surreal moment came when Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, was asked during a Comic-Con panel about the Hogan coincidence. Groening, who had been largely silent on the topic, smirked and said, "All I'll say is, we've been right before." The crowd roared, half in laughter, half in chills. And that's how it stayed, a story that never really ended, because it didn't need to. The Simpsons didn't just predict Hulk Hogan's death, they became part of it. Part of the mourning, part of the legacy, part of the strange intersection where art and life seemed to blur. Hulk Hogan was immortal in the ring. Now, thanks to a single frame of animation, he was immortal in another way, a way no one could have planned, and no one could forget. The screen would fade to black, then flicker back to life with the grainy warmth of VHS footage. It's 1985. Hulk Hogan in his prime, real American, blasting over the roar of a packed arena. The camera catches him mid-pose, muscles glistening, the gold championship belt strapped proudly around his waist. The crowd is electric, chanting his name in perfect rhythm. The narrator's voice, steady, solemn, cuts through. For decades, Hulk Hogan was more than just a wrestler. He was a symbol of strength, of charisma, of a generation that believed its heroes could never fall. Cut to a still frame, the infamous Simpsons scene. The slumped wrestler. The paramedics. The January 10th date barely visible on the wall calendar. The narrator continues, but sometimes the lines between fiction and reality blur. And when they do, They leave behind questions no one can answer. We dissolve into a slow montage archival footage of Hogan signing autographs, hugging kids at Make-A-Wish events, training in the gym. Intercut are interview clips from wrestlers, each sitting in a dimly lit room. Ric Flair's voice cracks. I don't know how they got it so close. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's something else. All I know is it's haunting. A brief cut to Dana Gould, former Simpsons writer, leaning back in his chair. We didn't set out to predict anything. But sometimes, you're tuned into the culture so deeply, you catch glimpses of where it's going, even if you don't realize it at the time. The narrator speaks again, over slow-motion shots of Hogan walking to the ring in his later years, moving slower now, but still smiling. In the final weeks of his life, Hogan was reflective. Friends say he spent hours going through old tapes, watching his matches, reading fan letters. It was as if he knew the curtain was coming down. A soundbite plays from a never-before-seen home video, Hogan in a kitchen, laughing with a friend. His voice, warm and unguarded. If I go out like that cartoon, brother, then I guess I'm immortal twice. Once here, once up there. The documentary would then fade to a black screen with white text. January 10, 2025, Clearwater, Florida. Hulk Hogan passed away at the age of 71. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest. The text fades. Silence. Then, in one final twist, the frame from The Simpsons reappears, zooming slowly into the drawn wrestler's face as the narrator's voice returns. We will never know if it was a coincidence, a work of art ahead of its time, or something far stranger. But we do know this sometimes. The stories we tell end up telling us. The music swells soft, haunting strings as we cut to a final shot of Hogan's real-life entrance at WrestleMania X8, fireworks exploding, fans screaming. He raises his hand one last time in victory, and the screen freezes mid-wave. The scene opens not in Springfield, but in a sterile archive room at a television preservation facility. Rows upon rows of labeled VHS tapes line the shelves, each one marked with the air date and episode number of The Simpsons. The camera glides slowly along the spines until it stops on 3F06. The Homer They Fall. Air date, November 10, 1996. The narrator's voice, familiar now, comes in like a careful scalpel cutting through silence. It begins here. A 22-minute episode about Homer becoming a boxer. A lighthearted parody of the Rocky films and the brutality of professional sports. On the surface, it has nothing to do with professional wrestling. But buried in the background, less than 5 seconds of animation, sits one of the most debated images in pop culture history. We fade into the frame. The locker room. The wrestler with the long blonde hair and thick handlebar mustache, his skin the familiar Simpsons yellow but drawn with an unmistakable orange hue in the gear. He's slouched forward, his chin nearly touching his chest. His boots, scuffed and unlaced, carry the letters HH in thick marker. In the corner, a calendar page marked January 10th. On a small TV screen in the background, a scrolling cheer-in reads, "Legend collapses. Fans stunned." In 1996, it was a gag so subtle that even the most die-hard wrestling fans didn't talk about it. But in January 2025, when news broke that Hulk Hogan had died of cardiac arrest in his Clearwater, Florida home, on January 10th, the internet's collective memory snapped to attention. The resemblance between the animated frame and the details emerging from that tragic morning were, to many, impossible to dismiss. Cut to archival news footage of the day Hogan died. Somber anchors speaking in measured tones. Video of Hogan at his last public event, where he appeared frilier than fans were used to seeing him. The split-screen comparisons start here. On one side, the cartoon still. On the other, a leaked image from a neighbor's phone showing paramedics inside Hogan's home gym, their positions eerily mirrored to those of the cartoon medics. Was it a joke gone too far? A remarkable coincidence? Or something else, something that speaks to the strange and unnerving history of The Simpsons' ability to mirror the future? We transition to a montage of predictions the show has allegedly made over its decades-long run. Each example is presented with precision. On the left, the animated version, and on the right, the real-life event. The 2000 episode where Lisa becomes president and remarks she inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. The 1998 gag about 20th Century Fox being a division of Walt Disney Company. The 1995 episode Lisa's Wedding showing characters using a video chat device eerily similar to modern FaceTime. And the eeriest of all, the 1997 reference to a flu from Asia sweeping Springfield, coupled with images of panic buying, something that would replay almost exactly during the COVID-19 pandemic, the voice of Dr. Melissa Hayden. The media studies analyst overlays the images. Patterns are how the human mind makes sense of chaos. Most of the time, we're looking backward, fitting the past into a story that feels coherent. But when a pattern emerges with this much detail and this much specificity, the question becomes unavoidable. Is it really just coincidence? From here, the documentary pivots to a deep dive into the production process of The Simpsons during its golden era in the 90s. We're taken inside a recreated writer's room, storyboards pinned to corkboards, stacks of scripts, doodles of Springfield's residents taped to walls. Former staff writer Dana Gould speaks from an interview chair, his hands moving animatedly as he recounts the atmosphere of the time. We were obsessed with detail. Even background gags that had nothing to do with the main story, we wanted them to be funny or interesting. And with wrestling, come on, wrestling was huge back then. Hulk Hogan was everywhere. You couldn't parody a wrestler without it looking a little like him. The interviewer asks about the January 10th date. Gould leans back, takes a breath. I honestly don't remember who picked that. But here's the thing, dates, numbers, little things like that, they were often inside jokes. Could it have been somebody in the room referencing a wrestling event? A birthday? Totally possible. But if you're asking me if we sat there and said, this is the day Hulk Hogan will die, then no. That's not how it works. But even Gould's denial doesn't dampen the sense of unease. The documentary now introduces a more shadowy element. A string of unverified claims from online forums and anonymous tipsters. One such claim, displayed as on-screen text with the poster's username blurred, alleges that two WWF executives visited the Simpsons office in 1995 to discuss potential cross-promotion. While the collaboration never happened, the meeting reportedly touched on the grueling physical toll of wrestling and the likelihood that major stars could face serious health issues later in life. The post ends with a chilling line. One of the animators joked that Hulk would keel over in the locker room one day. Guess they drew it into the show. The narrator doesn't endorse the claim outright, but lets it hang in the air as we see shots of an empty locker room, silent, the air heavy with imagined echoes. From here, the film returns to Hogan himself, placing the prophecy in the context of his later years. Friends and colleagues describe how, after decades in the spotlight, he had begun to pull back from public life, spending more time at home, reflecting on his career. Jimmy Hart, Hogan's longtime friend, speaks softly. He was a showman to the end, but yeah, he had his private moments. There were times he'd watch old stuff, his matches, interviews, even the cartoons he was in. And yeah, he knew about the Simpsons scene. He'd joke about it, but there was something in his eyes, like it was more than just a joke to him. This sentiment is echoed in the previously revealed unaired 2008 interview with the anonymous Simpsons writer, who recalled Hogan telling him, "You guys drew me dead before my time. Don't think I didn't notice." The film replays that clip here, letting the weight of those words settle before moving forward. The next segment expands the lens, drawing connections between Hogan's prophecy and a broader psychological phenomenon. Dr. Hayden returns to explain what she calls retroactive recognition, the way our brains highlight details in old media that match present events, while ignoring countless other predictions that never came true. The Simpsons has had hundreds of background gags over the years. Statistically, some of them will line up with the future just by chance. But when the match is emotionally charged, like predicting the death of a beloved public figure, we can't help but see it as meaningful. But as the documentary points out, the Hogan case goes beyond emotional resonance. The matching date, initials, and posture form a trifecta of specificity that's rare even in the long list of Simpsons coincidences. This isn't like predicting a general trend. It's like calling a shot with chilling precision. We're then shown fan-generated timelines cataloging other death predictions from The Simpsons, from the depiction of George Bush Sr. collapsing at an event, years before his real-life fainting incident, to an offhand joke about David Bowie disappearing into the stars before his passing. While some examples are obvious stretches, the Hogan frame stands apart for its photographic similarity to real events. The narrator draws the parallel. It's one thing to hint at the broad strokes of history. It's another to sketch a man's final moments decades before they happen, and to have those moments unfold in uncanny alignment with the sketch. The emotional impact of this is underscored by a series of interviews with wrestling fans filmed at a convention just months after Hogan's death. Many wear Hogan shirts or carry memorabilia for autograph signings. One man in his 50s, his voice breaking, says, "When I saw that cartoon after he died, I swear I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like losing him twice, once in real life and once in that scene." And the crazy part? It almost made him seem even more immortal. Like he was big enough to be part of some bigger story, you know. From here, the documentary shifts tone again, moving into a quieter, more reflective space. We're shown Hogan's funeral, private, intimate, his closest friends and family gathered in Clearwater. The casket draped in an American flag with red and yellow accents. A montage of photos from every stage of his life plays on a screen. In one moment, as the crowd dabs at tears, a close friend takes the podium and, with a bittersweet smile, says, "He once told me, 'Brother, if I go out like that cartoon, at least I'll be remembered twice, once by the fans, once by the whole world.'" Well, Hulkster, you got your wish. The line gets a ripple of laughter through the grief, but also a long pause afterward, a silence heavy with the realization that even in death, Hogan was still performing, still telling a story bigger than himself. The final chapter of this case file pulls the camera back even further. We're reminded that The Simpsons, whatever its methods, has woven itself so deeply into the fabric of pop culture that its predictions feel inevitable. It has become a mirror, not just of society's present, but of its possible futures. And in the case of Hulk Hogan, that mirror reflected something uncomfortably specific. We end on a shot of Springfield's animated skyline at sunset, fading into the real Florida coast. The two images merge, the yellow sky blending into the pink-orange hues of reality. The narrator's voice closes. Perhaps The Simpsons didn't predict Hulk Hogan's death. Perhaps life simply caught up to a piece of fiction. But once you've seen the image, once you've felt the chill of its accuracy, it's hard to let go of the question, what will they predict next? And who among us will be the next to live inside their prophecy? The screen fades to black, leaving only the faint echo of Hogan's voice from an old promo, "What ya gonna do, brother?" Before the sound cuts abruptly, leaving us with silence. The black screen lingers long after the narrator's voice fades, the silence heavy enough that viewers begin to wonder if the documentary has truly ended. Then, a faint static flicker bursts onto the screen, grainy VHS tracking lines, and an old Simpsons intro begins to play. The colors are slightly washed out, as if the tape has been sitting in a box for decades. The familiar clouds part, revealing the logo, but instead of transitioning into the cheerful, chaotic family rush home, the sequence cuts abruptly to a series of unrelated clips. The first is from an obscure Season 11 episode, Moe's Tavern. The dimly lit bar, its usual crowd replaced by a lone muscular figure with a shaved head and tribal tattoo on his arm. He sits slouched at the bar, a half-empty beer in front of him. Above his head, a small TV shows a wrestling match. The character's silhouette is unmistakable to modern fans. Roman Reigns. The narrator's voice returns, low and deliberate, as the screen freezes on the shot. This scene aired in March 2000. At the time, Roman Reigns was just a 14-year-old kid named Joe Anoa'i, far from the WWE spotlight. No one noticed. But in recent years, fans have returned to this frame and paired it with another image: Roman in real life, photographed in 2023, sitting in a nearly identical pose after a match, head bowed, exhausted, a beer bottle untouched in front of him. Was it a coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the shadow of Springfield stretches further than we thought. The image dissolves into another clip, this one from 2004's The Ziff Who Came to Dinner. In a background shot that was never a focal point, a wrestling ring sits in a convention hall. Inside is a stocky, heavily tattooed figure wearing a thick championship belt, slumped against the ropes while the referee calls for medical assistance. On the ring apron, barely legible, are the words West Coast Rumble 2027. The narrator continues. Some say this frame predicted a future Royal Rumble event. Others see something darker. They claim the wrestler's tattoos resemble those of Samoa Joe, or possibly even Kevin Owens. Both men have laughed off the theory. But if there's one thing we've learned, the laughter never lasts forever. We cut to social media clips, TikTok videos of fans pausing old Simpsons episodes to point out strange wrestling references. One clip shows a background poster from a 1998 episode that reads, "Farewell, Dead Man," with a cartoon Undertaker holding a casket. Fans have paired it with The Undertaker's real-life Hall of Fame induction speech in 2022, framing it as yet another prophecy fulfilled. In a dimly lit studio interview, wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer shakes his head. The Simpsons has become this lens people use to look at the future. And the scary part is, they're almost conditioned now to look for matches. Every time a wrestler appears in pop culture, fans start asking, okay, is this just a gag, or are we looking at something we'll be talking about in 10 years when it comes true? The screen fades to an even older clip, Season 5's Homer Loves Flanders. In the background of a single shot, a parade float passes by with a massive cardboard cutout of a wrestler who looks exactly like a young John Cena. He's holding up two fingers, and on the float's banner are the words, "See you in 2040. The narrator's voice dips into a whisper. Is it an in-joke from an animator? Or a note from the future? The tone darkens as the documentary transitions to fan-submitted case files of other Simpsons predictions that haven't yet come true. A scrolling list appears on screen, an animated wrestling arena collapsing mid-broadcast. A ring announcer dropping dead on stage. A mysterious figure wearing a mask with the letters MJ on the forehead, standing in the ruins of a burned-down stadium. The narrator interjects, "We may never see these moments outside of animation." But then again, we said the same thing about Hulk Hogan's locker room collapse. Until we didn't. The visuals cut back to the Hogan frame one final time, slowly zooming in until the image distorts into abstract shapes. The sound of a crowd cheering grows louder, but it's not happy, it's frantic, urgent, almost panicked, then silence. After a long pause, the screen lights up with grainy handheld footage, supposedly taken at a wrestling fan convention in 2019. Hogan, now older and walking with a cane, sits at a signing table. A young fan slides a printout of the Simpsons scene toward him. Hogan laughs, signs it, then leans in and says something inaudible. The fan grins, nods, and walks away. The narrator's final words hit over this moment. We don't know what he said that day. But maybe he understood something we didn't. That sometimes, the future doesn't arrive without warning. It's been here all along, sketched in yellow ink, waiting for us to catch up. The credits begin to roll. The screen is black. And then, halfway through the credits, one last thing. A Simpsons title card, bright yellow background, familiar font, appears with a single sentence in black text, next on The Simpsons, the final match of the immortal one. The date underneath reads January 10th, 2025. Fade to nothing. The narrator's voice comes in, lower and more deliberate than before, as if speaking to an audience that's already leaning forward in anticipation. When our original documentary aired, it left the wrestling world and pop culture at large grappling with a question. Did The Simpsons merely stumble into predicting Hulk Hogan's death, or was the prophecy deliberately seeded into the episode? In the months since, new testimonies, leaked production materials, and off-the-record conversations have pulled us deeper into a rabbit hole we didn't know existed. The scene cuts to a dimly lit silhouette interview, voice distorted, identity obscured. This is labeled, former Fox Animation employee, name withheld. The distorted voice speaks slowly, measured. You think it's just comedy, but the writer's room, It's more than that. For certain episodes, especially in the 90s, there were consultants, people who weren't staff but came in to give background on specific topics. For the boxing episode, they brought in two guys from the wrestling world. They didn't use their names, but I recognized one of them from an old WWF magazine. Those guys talked about locker room culture, health risks, even the reality that some stars might not make it past their 50s or 60s. The interviewer presses for names, but the silhouette shakes their head. Doesn't matter who. What matters is, when you hear about an aging star, with a certain look, living a hard, physical life, the image comes easy. You don't need to say his name. You just draw him. We fade to black, and then cut to an interview with a retired WWE road agent, speaking under his real name but clearly uneasy. Look, I can't prove anything about cartoons predicting stuff. But I do know this: Fox had a big reach, and The Simpsons was the kind of show where everybody wanted to sneak in inside jokes. I've been backstage when guys watched that Hogan scene and went quiet. Some of them thought it was funny. Others, not so much. Hulk himself? He didn't like to talk about it much, but he knew it existed. Trust me, he knew. The documentary then shifts to a forensic media analysis. Two production stills from the home where they fall.